Hi, I'm Hannah.
And I'm Matt Hannah.
And this is Horror Hour with the Hannahs,
where we talk about the top 10 scariest movies of all time according to sciences, but really just 1 through 5.
Yes, this is a part 2 episode. If you wanted to hear about what movies came in on places 10 through 6, you can definitely do that. Episodes are available wherever podcasts can be found. The Science of the Scare Project curates a list of the most terrifying English language films and puts them to a 250-person panel. Test subjects are invited to screenings of the movies where they are fitted with heart rate monitors and their heart rate is tracked throughout the movie. Their score system combines both heart rate and heart rate variance. With heart rate, the higher the number, the faster the movie got their audience's blood pumping, which is an indicator of excitement and fear. On the other hand, heart rate variance measures the time in between each beat of your heart. The lower the heart rate variance, the more stressed their audience members became, which is a good indicator of slow burn fear and dread. After collecting the information, they combine both the heart rate increase and heart rate variance to create a Science of the Scare score out of 100, and that is how they determine their full list. We are going to get into it pretty quick this week since we have 5 more movies to talk about. But before we do that, we did want to share that we posted some polls on Instagram for our followers there. If you don't follow us there, you should do that. Horror Hour with the Hannahs on Instagram and TikTok. But I posted some polls about what our audience thinks is the scariest movie of all time. So on an Instagram poll, you can only include 4 movies. So to reflect the movies we already discussed in last week's episode, I had to omit one. So I think we can all guess what I omitted. Exorcism of Emily Rose. So the options in the poll were Talk to Me, Smile, Hereditary, and Hell House LLC. Hereditary got 85% of the vote as the scariest of those 4 movies.
That is not surprising.
Hell House LLC got the other 15%. So,
also not surprising.
Yeah, no one thought Talk to Me or Smile was the scariest. I also put some polls up with movies in the top 5, so we'll share that a little later so we don't spoil too much now, if that's okay with you, Matt.
Works for me.
I guess now we can get straight into it with our special guest for the episode. Back from last week, we have Lonely and Suzie from Nobodies. You can definitely find Nobodies anywhere podcasts can be found, and you should follow them on Instagram at Nobodies. Let's do it.
Well, hell yeah. Let's move on to number 5, which is The Conjuring.
The Conjuring 2013 movie, directed by James Wan, written by Chad Hayes and Carrie Hayes, starring Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga. Paranormal investigators, the Warrens, come to the assistance of the Perron family, who experienced increasingly disturbing events in their newly occupied farmhouse in Rhode Island in 1971, based kind of off a true story. So, Suzie, let's go.
Okay, The Conjuring. So this movie, it's got the iconic scenes in it with and it has all of these little jump scares within it that really make it work. I don't love The Conjuring though. You guys can come at me. I didn't rewatch it for this episode because everything I saw in it the first time I remembered, and I don't know, I don't think it is that scary. Is that it?
Did everybody hang up because of that controversial opinion? I'll counter.
Why don't you convince me why this movie is scary?
Oh, I can't do any such thing, but I can convince you why it's iconic, because that's what it is. It's iconic and it's camp. So this is the beginning of one of the most successful.
But we're talking about scary.
Listen, I don't. Why do you have me on a show if I can't comment on anything else? You know I can't stay on task. There's 2 jump scares in it: the hide and seek and the wardrobe. That's it.
And that's it. And I don't think that's enough. And I don't think the story brings it far enough to make it anything better. But go on, sorry.
All right, well, I guess Suzie has cut me off. from my such critical,
Maybe it's
heartwarming
because
commentary on Ed
you've
Warren.
made me hate the Warrens, and I can't even like think about this movie anymore because I'm like, fuck the Warrens. They were
Ed
just
Warren's a horrible
blood
person.
hungry, money hungry fakes. It's okay.
Well, Matt and Hannah, why don't you take it away then, so I don't go into the intricacies of the Catholic exorcism.
Well, I 1,000% agree. The Warrens are super fucked up, especially Ed, and I think this movie is 1,000% Warren propaganda.
That being said, the movie still is awesome,
I think
and
it's
I'm going to
really-
ignore all the bad stuff.
It's really successful propaganda. Like, they do a really good job fostering the relationship with Ed and Lorraine, and if you can look back past the fact that they're shitty people,
Yeah, this is a movie about family.
they are like the heart of this movie. They make you really care what happens to them and the family. Between like fostering their connection to the family, like making pancakes with them, fixing their car, and it kind of dives into like Lorraine's issues with her last case, and I feel like, it just makes you kind of love them, which is problematic. I agree. I really love the aesthetic of this film. I think it looks great. It's a vibe for sure. I feel like, and to be fair, this is one of like the first 5 horror movies I've ever seen, because I'm a baby horror watcher comparatively compared to all of you guys. And so when I first watched this, it scared me shitless, I swear. Like I could have pooped my pants. I feel like the first third of this movie kind of felt like it wasn't giving me a break at all. Like the wardrobe scare gets me every time. The clap game gets me every time when like the hands just reach out to mom and clap. Like that scares the shit out of me. And I imagined that for a really long time after watching the movie. I think the comedic timing of Act 2 really helps bring you up before it drags you back down in Act 3. I do think the exorcism sequence at the end does not do it for me. I don't find that scary.
Big disagree.
I think it kind of brings down the movie for me a little bit. But overall, it does scare me. I hid 4 times and screamed 5 times the last time I saw it, which was probably the 4th or 5th time I watched this movie. So for some reason, like, I'm still completely unprepared for it. It still affects me.
So for me, I'll say, I agree that there's not a lot of jump scares in this, and I think this is the movie that's proof that you don't need them to be scary. Because the groundwork that is done in that first third just builds up so much tension and so much of this threat that when those scares happen, they are, 1, horrific, but 2, leave me uneasy for another large majority of the film. We have an episode on this. You can listen to it, but I will say I love the way that this is structured in 3 acts. You have the first act, which is kind of like setting up the Warrens, but then also it's the traditional ghosts in the house harassing the family, very scary. Act 2 is where they come together and you get a little build up. You get some family fun. It brings you back and makes you think everything's going to be okay. And then Act 3 is not scary in the traditional paranormal sense. Act 3 is like an action movie, which we know James Wan has directed those as well. And I kind of love that because I think it really keeps you on your toes. And Act 3, and as goofy as it is, and I think it is kind of campy, this exorcism is amazing to me because it is so over the top. It feels like I'm watching a stupid Marvel movie in a good way, not derogatory way. Where Ed Warren is, as I call them, Ed Warren or Ed and Lorraine, the first Avengers, and they like just straight up like beat the shit out of this ghost or this witch, whoever it is, Bathsheba. Really enjoy this. Saw it in theaters. I still find it scary, and I think it's one that I definitely recommend to a lot of people.
The child acting was fine for everybody else because I didn't think the kids did a great job in this movie, and maybe that's another reason I don't love it. They were just kind of annoying.
The kids are notoriously terrible in all of the Conjuring films.
What? Yeah. So, I don't know.
I felt the kids in the second one were considerably worse than the kids in this one. I feel like they didn't really bother me that much.
Because they're British.
Yeah.
The one with like the bowl
it.
haircut in this one was I was just like, stop, just stop.
It's the bowl haircut.
I will say, James Wan's movies are camp.
Yeah.
I think Lonely said it as well, and I think maybe I turned my brain off for that. And I will also say, if you guys don't know, I love Malignant. I'm like a big fan of Malignant. for the same reason, though, that it is unabashedly supposed to be camp. It's making fun of slashers to some degree, while also being a really good slasher that is embracing all of the tropes. And so, like, I think if you know what you're getting, you can kind of turn the brain off on the child acting a little bit.
I mean, like, I mostly agree with that, but I will slander Malignant all day, every day.
You guys, someday you'll understand. You'll be
We won't.
I won't. Elevated, or what word am I?
What are you fucking trying to say? I don't agree.
You'll be enlightened. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah, I won't. That's fine.
Does anyone else have something to say about The Conjuring? Did I miss any of you? Lonely, you didn't say too much.
It's okay. I'll sit on my hands. You can't keep me quiet for Insidious. It's in my top 5 horror films of all time, so I'll bide my time.
Well, let's talk about Insidious then.
Matt, why don't you start us? Because
you need to read a description about it.
It's so true, bestie. 2010 movie directed by James Wan, written by Lee Wynell, starring Patrick Wilson and Rose Byrne. The story centers on a married couple whose son inexplicably enters a comatose state and becomes a vessel for a variety of demonic entities in an astral plane. I'm letting Matt go first because he's a bitch about this movie.
Okay, I think this movie's fine. I like a lot of it. Ooh. Lonely, I'm sorry. I will tell you why. I think that everything I dislike about Insidious, he fixed going into The Conjuring. I felt like it was a complete upgrade. My issue from Insidious, and maybe I do need to look at it from the camp lens more, is that it feels to me kind of like a bad haunted house run by a bunch of teenagers. The audio stings make me laugh because I'm just like, what the hell is this? Like, it feels like it's cheating. I think the lipstick demon is lame by the time we get to it. And there are some really good scares. It's just there's so many of them that it's like almost it's exhausting to the point where they just like stop working for me, which is why I equate it to a bad haunted house. So I'm sorry that I don't like it that much. I think there are a lot of good parts, but I like what he did later better. So tell me why I'm wrong.
I am shocked that you think The Conjuring is better than Insidious, and I'm going to let Lonely take you down in the ring.
Yeah, so I'll just jump right into it. So this is a hot take. This is James Wan's best film. Full stop. It sucks to be James Wan because imagine the first big film you do. It's your best film. Imagine that reality. This film paved the way for anything that came after 2010 horror. This made the long jump scare. James Wan is a master at this jump scare. He made it, he sells it, and everything that came after it is a reproduction of what he did. This is one of my top 5 horror films of all time. It has the iconic 2010s blue. I will never stop talking about the 2010s blue. You know, it's that same Twilight feel where everything is strangely blue and green. And this has a stunning freaking story. It is one of the most impressive world building that we see in the 2010s horror genre. It does a ton of world building, and it's so fucking weird and unapologetic. It builds the whole universe of the further. It builds the rules of the space and how we're supposed to interact with it. And has stunning use of strategic color and sound. And I mean, I think that the really harsh strings in this film really make it. I think it was iconic. I think it still is iconic. When you hear that string, you still think of Insidious. And it's so hard for me. I put Insidious in the same realm as I put The Exorcist, in that the film holds so much prowess in the genre for what came after it. It is hard to argue its place in the genre, personally. It's got some really crazy scenes. One of my favorite scenes of all time in horror is the scene of Elise and Specs and her other assistant. They're standing in the bedroom and they're sketching the picture of the demon. And when they finally turn the sketchbook around and you see the demon perched over the bed, one of the most successful scenes in horror of all time, in my opinion.
I just got the chills when you said that.
Yeah, it's one of the best horror film scenes of all time. And it's campy, so it's not to everybody's taste. I know the demon, cameo by Darth Maul is always a sticking point for people.
But that's what people get caught up on. Like, that is 3 seconds of this movie. You know, there's
Yeah,
so much more to it than that. You were talking about like the the little dreamlike world they go in. That was like a mood right there. I
Yep.
could do a whole movie just in that dream sequence world. And I wish we get more of that, but sadly it didn't happen in the sequel either.
So that's my love letter to Insidious. I mean, and what's such a freaking shame is that every film that comes after this in the franchise is just so bad. It's just not
So
good.
bad.
I loved Last Key because it's such like a love letter to films of the franchise, and Red Door was as well. But they're not good films. It's so hard to stack up against the original Insidious. So that's my 2 cents.
I think Insidious, I think it weaves in that comedy by not being like too heavy handed with it. The same way we get like the comedy in Get Out. I feel like Insidious nailed it in this movie too. And this is a genuinely scary movie. When there's that closet, do you remember the closet scene? That
Yep, the little
scene.
boy in his top hat, tiptoe through the tulips.
Yes. And I have a closet in my house that looks like that. And I cannot have that closet open at night in the dark. No way, Jose. There's a little like light in that room because I don't want to see what he saw. Scary movie. Just forget about the low budget demon. And then what do you think of it?
You guys are making me feel so seen because this was the first ever movie we talked about on this podcast because it is the first ever horror movie I ever saw, which is kind of crazy. My friend brought it to a sleepover for my other friend's birthday. It was like, we're watching this. And I was like, oh, by the way, I will pee my pants in front of all of you. And I survived, and I think it just has like so much nostalgia for me because of that. So I made us cover it first, and Matt was being a little dickhead the whole time.
I want to say I said all that stuff. This is still like a 4 out of 5 movie for me.
You
So
gave it like a
I gave it a 7.
No,
I gave it like a 7.
You gave it a 6.
Well, I would say I gave it a 7.5, which is
You
basically a
gave
4
it
out of 5.
6 on the episode.
Okay.
But that's fine.
Well,
you can change your mind. That's great. Growth. We love it.
I also will say that I need to say that I agree with them about that scene. That was with the gas mask and her doing the sketch. That was my absolute favorite scene in the movie. I thought that was fantastic, and I just wish the rest of the movie felt more like that scene. That was where my complaint is. But again, this is still, like I said, like a 4 out of 5 for me. It doesn't stack up to some of the other stuff, I think.
Well, I'm glad that you've grown in your opinion.
I just want to add one more thing. The play with time, too, in all of these movies. It just reminds me of a Kurt Vonnegut novel. The way things happen for a reason and they interact with other things in a different time. And I love that about this movie.
Yeah, James Wan is great with interlocking timelines as well. That's why it's just a shame that the rest of the Insidious franchise is so weak.
I refuse to watch the rest of the Insidious franchise because I liked this one so much. I hid 6 times and screamed 5 times while rewatching this, my most recent time. Even though this is my most watched horror movie ever, it still got me that bad. The Tiptoes Through the Tulip Kid has literally ruined my life. I can't listen to that song without feeling extremely uncomfortable and horrified. And I think that's kind of successful because the scary kid is just out in the open. I think it's also very fun because it does play on some like common tropes that are present in either horror movies or just like in our real lives, like the fear of attics and basements and the haunted house tropes of like some stings. And I like how they show the outside of the house often, even though it's like your classic, like 2000s, 2010, like upper middle class home.
With the grayest filter of all time.
It makes the house a character, which then subverts your expectations when it's not the house that's haunted, it's their son. Also, that is such an iconic quote. It's not your house that's haunted, it's your son. James Wan, like Lonely said, is a master behind the camera. I think he does a really good job of placing the threat just outside of the frame. The lipstick demon, like we said, is easily the worst part of this movie, but it is shown so briefly that it really doesn't bring it down. I think Matt, for a long time, has convinced me that this isn't as good as it is, and I'm gonna go back on the record saying I rated it too low the first time, and I love this movie forever. So we can move on to our number 3.
Stand by your convictions.
I'm easily manipulated. I don't know.
You don't have to listen to me.
Peer pressure gets me. So we're going to move on to number 3, which is Skinamarink, a 2022 film written and directed by Kyle Edward Ball. 2 children wake up in the middle of the night to find their father is missing and all of the windows and doors in their home have vanished. Lonely, do you want to take it away here?
Sure thing. So I am a Skinamarink. What do they call it? I'm a Skinamarink supporter. This is a very polarizing film. Do I think this film is scary? Absolutely. This film scared the shit out of me. So I will be the first to admit that it's super polarizing, super experimental, both in pacing and in style. And the more that I go back to this film, the more that I think the scares and the concept of the film is definitely rooted in a newer generation. And that's why I'm like working on this theory that potentially older generations of horror viewers just don't resonate with this kind of horror. And that's okay, because it plays with this new concept of liminal spaces. And when we think about things that are scary, liminal spaces are maybe not a new concept, but more recently popularized. So if anybody is not familiar with liminal spaces, it's this idea of places that are in between transitions, or things that are doorways or psychological transitions between different things. And you can often think of like empty malls, empty playgrounds, sort of that deja vu feeling, very surreal, eerie nostalgia. And Skinamarink really plays with that fear. It's also an analog horror, which is the descendants of the creepypasta generation. Another thing that really makes this time bound in some ways, that I don't think a lot of older generations, if you're consuming that type of content online, are going to understand what Skinamarink is doing. And that, again, makes it polarizing, because you want films to be consumed at such a high level. But this film is super fucking scary. It is so strange and bizarre. I was literally, as I was writing my notes for this, I was thinking too much about Skinamarink, and I started getting so freaked out when I had to like let my dogs out, that I would like open the back door and like clip into the back rooms and be trapped there. It was really fucking scary. Some of the scariest moments for me are when the mom is sitting on the bed and the boy cat, I think it's Kaylee at that point, the little girl, she's like looking at the mom and she has her back to her, and her voice is so distorted, and you get this feeling that something's so wrong. And then later Kevin finds Kaylee and she has no face. That's fucked up. And then there's one point in the film where there's a voice telling him to put a knife in his eyeball. And somebody with intrusive thoughts in OCD, that's a hellscape that I do not want to unpack. So this film is so vaguely familiar to an audience if they get it. It appeals to that uneasiness. It's almost an optical illusion. Fucked up. Big fan of this film. It's very, very scary in my opinion. But Suzie,
I feel like I'm the older generation she is referring to. And fuck you, Lonely. No.
So as I was writing this, I knew you were going to be like, well, at least calling me old. I'm like, that's not it at all.
And I am part of the creepypasta. I listen to the No Sleep podcast like every day in my car, so I love all of that. I really enjoy liminal spaces, but I need there to be a coherent plot. I don't want to do a lot of heavy lifting with a movie that I already have to do that heavy lifting with the visuals, because this movie is so dark. There are long time spans where nothing's happening. And I can understand, like, if this maybe was a short film, I probably still wouldn't like it, but it wouldn't piss me off for such a long amount of time, because I watched this again last night. And if you're going to be experimental, good. Go for it. Art is art. I make nothing like visual like this, but expect for it to be polarizing. And a lot of people that like Skinamarink, and you are not one of them, but they seem to like almost be on a pedestal of like, I like it and you don't get it. And like, yeah, I don't fucking get it. Is this a movie where like the mom killed the dad? Is this a movie where it's like all a metaphor? Is this a movie where like aliens took the house and brought it someplace else and stuff is happening there? I just don't get it. And I will admit I don't get it. And I think even if somebody explained it to me, I don't even know if the person making it got it. So fill me in. Enlighten me.
Do you think it has anything to do with the backrooms though?
See, it would make more sense if we saw the transitioning, but I feel like this is just shots. You don't see like moving into different places. One of my favorite shows, Severance, does the back rooms like beautifully in like a coherent way. But I don't know. What did you guys think, Hannah? Are you a Skinamarink fan? I don't know where I don't think you like this.
I'm so excited to talk about it, but I think Hannah's going to talk first.
Yes, so I definitely found this fucking scary. I hit 5 times. Well, combined, we hit 5 times and screamed 6 times. I don't know who did what, but I felt like at first I was feeling like this movie was slow. I was kind of like dozing off, and then it got to a certain point where all of a sudden I was like, I get it. And I am scared. And I don't really know what did it for me, but I do feel like throughout the film, the way it's shot is so unsettling. The focus of the shot a lot of the times is at the side of the screen, so you're really not seeing like the whole room, and I think that's incredibly alarming because you're like, where is the threat? And also, that's not how we're used to seeing scenes. Like, we're not used to seeing something being in like the first fifth of the shot like that. There was also like a ton of canted angles, which again can be really unsettling when used correctly. And the fact that it's so grainy and it's kind of hard to see certain things, and like it allows your brain to kind of trick you into seeing things that may or may not be there, I thought was really fun. I used to have this nightmare when I was between like ages 10 to like 20. I had a recurring nightmare that was like grainy like this texture. And so I think because it reminded me of like such a personal nightmare I used to have, I was like, oh fuck. But I would say, obviously the plot is lacking substance, so I wouldn't call this like a fun watch, and it's not something I'm eager to rewatch, but I think because its primary purpose is just to scare the shit out of you or unsettle you, it worked for me. So, Matt, take it away. I know you love this.
So I will go out and say that right off the bat, this is the scariest movie on the list for me, and this is my favorite movie on the list. So Lonely, we're in the same club of people that like this. While thinking about this and while you two talked about it, my chest started to hurt and feel tight, because that's how I felt while watching this the entire time. I was basically like petrified. We had all the lights off. I had it very loud. And I was like just horrified and just like stuck. This is one of the first movies where I was like, can somebody please tell me how much time is left? Because I don't know if I can like make it through this. And Suzie, since you're asking for someone to explain to you what it's about, I'll tell you my interpretation. I believe this is about child abuse from the perspective of a child that can't really understand what that abuse is. It's like kind of the idea of like children don't really have control over anything until they leave the house. It's clear that like dad is abusing them is the way I see it, but it's like hard for the child to see that. They don't really see the dad that's abusing them as the same dad that can then turn around and like love them, or so they say. So that's kind of like my big read on it. It's this idea of like loss of control. The house is losing its windows and losing its doors, because as a child, if a parent says you're going to stay at home, that is what happens, right? Like you don't get to leave. It just completely like, I guess, brought me, like sucked me, and I allowed it to completely affect me. I allowed myself to be like placed in that space, stuck with these kids. And I will also say, I think one of the most horrific things I've ever seen is that last shot where you're just basically forced to stare at this face. And I wish I could remember what it says. It's asking like, he's saying, who are you? Who are the kids asking like, who are you to it? And in my mind, this is the abusive father. And this is,
see, I thought it was the mom. The mom saying, go to sleep. And I'm thinking maybe this is like this boy and the whole movie's a fever dream because he got the concussion and his mom is there for him. Like, you know, it's okay, go back to sleep. So
that is another read. I think that's fine, because I do think the like 365 days thing confuses me. I don't really know how to read that one. That might have just been, they're like, oh, let's just throw this in there and be cool. Because
is there any interview with the director that we know of where he explains his purpose or the purpose?
So I've read up on it a little bit, and he talks about how. So this film was also a freaking blockbuster success. $15,000 budget, made over $2 million,
Hell
and
yeah.
it was made during COVID. So basically, the story that he tells is that he was really playing on analog horror, and he wrote himself and his sister into the characters of Kevin and Kaylee. That's as far as he really gets with it. So that's why, Matt, your theory about potentially it being an abusive situation is really interesting, because he hints that whatever story he is trying to tell is mirroring his childhood with his sister. So it's very interesting. He doesn't really come out and say it, but he was really appealing to that Blair Witch effect, where he wanted this film to go viral on the internet and get all this buzz and then launch. Like, I found this film in places before it was officially streaming. You know, I got my hands on it because I wanted to see it. I wanted to review it before anybody else did. So that's as far as he goes, though, Susie. He doesn't really explain anything else.
See, that's my problem. So if he is trying to, express something that happened to himself, he's putting it out there for everybody to see, but then you don't want to explain it anymore. And it almost like brings it to this pretentious level to me that just makes it very inaccessible. And I think the people that don't like it also find that it's super inaccessible for that same reason.
I would add, so I do think it's interesting learning that it was supposed to represent him and his sister, because it was shot in his childhood home that his parents still live in. So I think that kind of like adds to that. But again, I don't know if it's, expressing that he experienced some sort of abuse as a child. I really don't know. That's not how I read it when I first watched it. But to be fair, I didn't get too far into a reading when I first watched it.
You're too scared.
But I will say he did kind of come out and say that he was just trying to, like, make a movie inspired by tropes that people, inspired by what people consider their most commonly submitted nightmares. He used to run a YouTube channel, Bite Size Nightmares, where he would ask people to comment about their nightmares, and then he would shoot recreations of them. So he was really just trying to, like, capture that. So I think, like, thinking about it from that lens kind of makes sense. Like, it is capturing a lot of things that are truly horrifying and that we would all have nightmares about as children, or at least I did.
I'm shocked it's on this list, considering I think it's like a 50-50 split in the horror community about this movie. I don't think it's like a majority of the people think it's scary. Well, the heart rates of these people, but how many was it? 250? I mean, if you go out and you talk to 10 horror people at the next horror convention you go to, half of those people are going to say this movie sucked.
Especially if they're at a horror con.
And I will say, like, you don't have to take my interpretation. I don't think going to try to find an interpretation makes me enjoy it anymore. I think, like, I checked narrative at the door. I wasn't worried about narrative, because really this is just, like, it is just a nightmare. And I think it's supposed to feel like a nightmare, and that you don't need to, like, worry about plot. It is kind of, I guess, a very Hollywood kind of American film mindset that, like, narrative is number one, where around the world, a lot of times style is number one, especially in, like, French films. And in plenty other of countries, like, narrative is secondary to everything else. So
But I don't think it was scary even without the narrative, but that's okay.
Well, then that's okay. You're allowed to hate it. I'm just excited, so I want to talk about why I love it so much.
No, and I appreciate anybody who makes art and puts art out. I have a problem with, like, people that don't explain why and leave it up to all of us to, like, do that work for them. But Hannah, that insight that you explained about him recreating people's nightmares, that kind of makes sense in this. And then if I'm now going to think that, like, this is just like a recreating nightmare and there is no hidden meaning or there is no subtextual information or no metaphor, that just, like, makes me not like the film even more. But
Oh no.
I am done hating on Skinamarink.
Real quick, when you said you don't like when a creator, like, makes something and then really has no explanation for it, that just reminded me of stop motion and how much that
I did hate stop
fucking
motion.
director pissed me off.
You're right. Yep.
But we can move on to our next movie. Number 2, second most scary, is Host, a 2020 film directed by Rob Savage, written by Rob Savage, Gemma Hurley, and Jed Shepard, starring Haley Bishop. 6 friends accidentally invite the attention of a demonic presence during an online seance and begin noticing strange occurrences in their homes. Matt, go ahead.
This one's fine. Sorry, I blew my load on Skinamarink. I love that movie. Host was cool. It's a found footage shot from Skype, which I feel like everyone had that idea to do during COVID. Some pretty good scares. And, you know, it was definitely a product of its time during COVID. I don't know if I have too much to say, but anyone else? What do you guys think? Susie, you want to go?
Yes, I fucking love Host. I watched this movie on my laptop with like a sheet over me, and so I felt like I was right there with them. It's got some plot holes for sure, but if we're talking about the topic for your podcast, which is scares, this has some of the most effective scares out of any of them on this list. And nobody's jumping in to cut me off. I don't know.
I mean, I can cut you off if you want. I hate this film, but continue.
You
Susie.
can
Tell me
hate
more.
it, but some of the parts that were scary were genuinely scary because they were things I hadn't seen before. So, I mean, the seance over Skype was kind of dumb, but I don't know. When you see them, like, let me try and explain why this is scary, and then I can contradict myself. Okay, the part where she's like going on loop on her screen and then her face like smashes against the screen and it just like flutters for a little while. That was a good and effective jump scare. And then when you see things happening to each of them, I don't know, I felt I was scared. I can't explain why I was scared, but I had a lot of fun with this movie. And it is a one-hit wonder, and it's not that great on the rewatch, but the first watch was very scary. Not a great plot.
So I would contradict that it's actually better on the second watch. Because
Okay.
I watched this, and the first time I watched it, I hated it. And I wonder if it's because I worked in like the Zoom COVID era. So every day it was Zoom, and then I watched this horror movie, and I'm like, freaking gag me with a spoon. But I liked it I thought it was more fun watching it the second time.
The fact that they're all alone, and they're like alone in their spaces, and there's nobody to help them, that made it scary for me because I was also watching it at my house alone. So I kind of felt like, what would I do if there was something in my house and I had to like go out? I can't go anywhere because everything's closed. Nobody's opening their door to you because everybody at this time was like afraid of COVID. So it was effective to me, and I'm gonna get shit on because I hate The Conjuring and I love Host.
I think a lot of people like this film, Susie, honestly. My issue, not even an issue, my question that I have regarding the COVID era horror, especially with Host, where you just mentioned it, Susie, that the fact that they're in the height of the pandemic is integral to the story. Like the fact that they're in these separate places and, you know, they can't see each other. It's critical to the plot. I always wonder how they're going to age. Like, even now, we're like 4 years out from the height of the pandemic. And I don't know. These films feel very nostalgic and different in a way. Like, they very much don't feel like the present that we're living in. So I'm just curious at how they're going to age. I mean, it's got some cool jump scares. The plot is so bad. And I think where I struggle is like, if I was in this situation, I would kill Gemma. Truly. I would like leave my apartment. Fuck the pandemic. We're going out together, honey, because you just got me freaking cursed by a demon because you wanted to be funny. Oh my god. I take her out so fast. But there's some cool jump scares. I love the scene in the attic where Caroline is going up the ladder and
Yes.
she's like holding the laptop.
Yes.
I think that's just so funny. Like if you picture somebody like going up an attic ladder.
I think her
and just,
scare
like,
was the
holding up
worst.
a MacBook.
Yeah, her death
Yes,
was the scariest. And then the next one was the
Agreed.
one with the flower, where she's like trying to find the thing in her apartment, and then her boyfriend like just comes like crashing down.
Oh yeah, he like
But
falls off the balcony inside the
yeah,
house. And then I thought about that too. I'm like, if I was being chased by a demon, nothing in my head would be like, you know what I need? Flour. Let me start throwing flour around.
and a
So I guess
sheet.
we learned something. Yeah, I had a sheet,
You're
but
talking
that was fucked
about
up too because like they.
you're talking about it being like a time capsule of COVID, and I think there aren't a lot of them. So, like, I'll take it. We have this and like a handful of other ones that are decent, but not a lot of good came out of COVID horror.
That's our 2 cents on that. And then the zoom filters when the
Oh yeah.
the makeup filter lands on the ghost. That's so funny. But yeah, I mean it's a good time. It's a good time. The plot's really shitty. Make it a drinking game, and you just like they do in the film.
I just watched it for the first time. So like putting myself back into how I felt during COVID, I feel like had I watched this in 2020, I think it would have hit a little harder, but it still hit like kind of capturing the isolation we felt during COVID and like how it would feel to be in this situation where you're completely alone and you don't have anyone present to help you. I did hide 5 times and scream 5 times, and it's a pretty short movie, so I think that's pretty impressive. But I just felt like this is just a fun time. It's nothing to write home about. I don't know if it's gonna like stick with me, and I think part of that is just there's like really no serious themes here besides like don't disrespect the dead, I guess. But I did feel like the setup of some of the shots was pretty scary, and just like having the girls in front of their camera and then you could see behind them that like a door would be open or you could see down a hallway. That did really build the tension for me because I always expected to see something in the doorway. So I kept like trying to guess what would happen, and I sometimes was right, not always, because I just kind of thought there'd be a shape in the back. I did think the flower and the sheet scene were pretty funny. Because I just think that trope entertains me. I think it's done better in It Follows, but it be like that. So, I don't know. I wouldn't say this is like my favorite movie on the list. It's certainly not, but I think it's fun, and if anyone wanted to watch this, I'd be like, yeah, sure. So we can finish up with our number one, which is Sinister. Sinister is a 2012 film written and directed by Scott Derrickson, co-written with C. Robert Cargill. It stars Ethan Hawke as a struggling true crime writer whose discovery of snuff films depicting gruesome murders and strange supernatural elements in his house puts his family in danger. So I'll get started with this one because I have feelings. I did hide 3 times and scream 3 times. It was my second time watching it because I don't like this movie very much. I don't understand that this is consistently rated as one of the scariest movies. One of my horror hot takes is this movie is not very scary. I know I did hide and scream, but that's mostly because like the little murder vignettes I don't want to look at. I think that they are very unsettling and uncomfortable. Like their brutal deaths, and especially just imagining a child doing them is super uncomfy. But beyond that, it didn't really do much for me. I feel like the creature design of Bagul is kind of like so-so. It's not my favorite. It's not my least favorite. None of the jump scares I felt like were built to in a way that they were overly successful for me. Thematically, I do kind of like what this is saying about the ethics of true crime media and exposing tragedy, but Nightcrawler with Jake Gyllenhaal probably did that better. Not horror, but movie.
That movie makes my chest hurt. So
yeah, honestly, I find that scarier than this. Ultimately, I just don't really understand why this is talked about so much. If anyone has an answer for me, like, please tell me I'm wrong. But I will close by saying Ethan Hawke does look cute in that little sweater with the elbow patches. Lonely, do you want to tell me why I'm right or wrong?
I agree completely. Suzie and I did this on our Haunted House episode with Rob and Suze from Spooky AF, and I think Sinister is another one that's really overhyped and ultimately forgettable. I don't love this film. I don't have a lot to say about it because personally, I don't think a lot happens. And like, my biggest critique of this film is that it is so visually dark. Like, all of the scenes are dark, and I can never fucking tell what's going on. Like, the scare comes so late because I can never tell what's going on because the shots are so freaking dark. And I think you really captured it, at least in my opinion, really well, Hannah, which is the concept is what's fucked up. The idea that children are like the antagonist here is what really bothers people, I think. This idea that children could commit these kinds of acts are what tends to like bother people. I do find that a lot of films with this kind of subtext are kind of hokey though, because you're relying on child actors and that can always be a hit or miss. Like, I find the child acting in this to be very subpar. I think the whole kill scene of Ethan Hawke is very subpar. Like, the mysterious green goo in the coffee. I'm like, oh my god. And then we have another freaking woo-woo cult story. So it's like, oh boy, more cults. That's the whole. We're all doomed by the cults. I'm like, can we get any creativity here? Cough, cough. Long Legs did the exact same thing. Boo. So, Susie, what do you? I think you like this one better, right?
I do, but I don't think they developed the characters very well at all for us to really care about any of them. And Ethan Hawke can't play a dad. He's just not like dad vibes at all. So that kind of like didn't fit with me. I think the reason people like this movie so much is because the pacing is pretty steady, and when it's slowing down a little bit, you get like another one of those vignettes. But overall, I don't think it definitely isn't the scariest movie, especially when you see like the kid running scene at the end where like Ethan Hawke will turn and the kids will like run by him in kind of slow motion and then he'll turn and he won't be there. That just seemed kind of hokey to me. And the antifreeze in the coffee, here, daddy, good night. Like, come on. But it's not a bad movie. I think it's not that
I'm
scary.
shocked that this is really shocked this is the top one on
Me
this
too.
list.
I
I think Host shouldn't even be this far up on the list. Like, by scares alone, there are so many other films we already talked about that should be higher.
And why isn't It Follows on this list?
Agreed.
So,
Agreed. Even though I don't like that film, I
scarier
still
than
agree.
most of these. Yeah, shocked this is number one.
Oh,
What
we
did
know.
you
No,
guys
this
think?
this list is. I'll say this list is completely flawed, and we're definitely like aware. I mean, Sinister was so big, and maybe that's why it got there. I actually know a ton of people that like love this movie. I'm in the same boat. I think it's completely average. I think that there are some really great parts to it. I think the idea of having a struggling writer who does, true crime, not even true crime, he's writing fucked up books and uses inspiration from crime, is trying to like chase the dragon of his original success with solving this case. I like that idea. I like the idea of him just basically stumbling across these snuff films that he can't stop looking at. And I really think anytime he's watching the films, the movie is fun. And I'm like, holy shit, this is like some messed up stuff. I feel like I shouldn't be watching this. But then pretty much anything outside of that just kind of falls completely flat, which leaves it very just average. Bagul is kind of lame. The whole, like you said, the cult portion of it is not great. And I think it kind of just loses steam by the end. And I don't think it's particularly scary. So I'm in the same boat as everyone.
All right. So obviously we don't think Sinister is the scariest on this list. Going based off these 10 films, what would you say is the scariest for you personally? Matt, you can.
I already said mine. Mine was Skinamarink. Hannah, what about you?
My hide and jump counts have me tied with Hereditary, Insidious, and Skinamarink. I think there's things about all of them that I find really scary, so it's kind of hard for me to break it down. But I think Hereditary stuck with me the most, but Insidious gets me feeling my heart rate up the most. So I'll go with that. I'll just say Insidious. Okay.
Susie.
I think Hell House LLC has the most rewatchability. I watch it every Halloween, and it's still scary. And then second would be Smile.
Mine is Skimmering, but I think in terms of this is gonna shock people, everybody sit down, sit down. Scariest on the list in terms of marketability and like consumability, I think Hereditary, honestly. I think it as much as I don't care for the story, I mean it's iconic for what it's done for the genre. So I would say personally Skimmering, but realistically probably Hereditary.
Yeah, I feel that. So favorite film overall from this list, regardless of how scary you found it or not.
You can come back to me really quick. I already said it was also Skinamarink.
Yeah,
So.
You're easy. Susie, what about you?
Smile. No. I'm going to take that back. I'm going to have to go with Insidious, just because it has a special place in my heart. Smile would be second.
And Lonely?
Also Insidious. Hard to argue with my top 10, so I would definitely say Insidious.
I will say you made me appreciate Insidious more. I liked your, I don't want to call it a rant. It was a speech on Insidious made me want to watch it again.
It was very impassioned.
Yeah.
And she was right. I wrote in my notes, nostalgia tells me it's Insidious. I think at the time I would say it's a complete piece of art. Maybe Hereditary, but I'm feeling Insidious in this moment, so I'm gonna stick with it. So we have some Insidious fans on this episode, that's for sure.
We're almost done here.
Yeah,
right?
What is a horror? Last question. What's a horror that you were surprised did not make this list? And to be clear, like we said, this is English language films only. So, if you have another language, you can feel free to say it, but they wouldn't have included it anyway. Lonely, why don't you go first?
Sure. So I kind of separated that question into two answers. So one is like popular opinion. So what films do people talk about a lot as really, really scary? I don't necessarily agree, but I was really surprised that It Follows wasn't on this. I'm not a huge fan of It Follows, but I know a lot of people in the community really love that film and really think it's scary. Another one is like Mungo. I'm also not I don't find that film super scary, but a lot of people cite Lake Mungo as one of the scariest films they've ever seen, so I'm surprised that wasn't here either. My personal additions that I'm surprised about, The Strangers, the original. I feel like that has a lot of really impressive jump scares. The original Blair Witch, I know it hasn't aged super well, but in terms of, again, that tension, those jump scares. And then Mother, that film is so fucked up that I would put Mother in the same ring as Hereditary in terms of that art house scare where you're like, I don't know what the fuck is going on, but it's really, really wigging me out. And then in terms of films that I didn't realize either until afterwards that it was English language films only. A film that I definitely think should have been on here if it was more inclusive for language would be Incantation. That film is fucking wild. So wild. So those would be mine. What about you, Susie?
Okay, I got a list here. So obviously I think It Follows should have been on this list, but that's in my top 10. The Autopsy of Jane Doe, I think, is an extremely scary film. As Above, So Below, another really fucking scary film. The Grudge is really scary. The Ring, The Void, Killing Ground. There's so many scary films I'm shocked didn't make it here. And because Lonely got to say another language film, I'm going to say Terrified from 2017 or 2018. That's one of the scariest films I've ever seen in my entire life.
I've heard very good things about that, but I have not yet seen it.
Yeah, we're behind. Yeah, I was very surprised The Ring wasn't on here because I feel like people talk so highly of The Ring. I didn't think it was as scary as I think most people do, but the imagery of Samira is pretty fucked up. Her crawling out of the TV is like an iconic image, so, take it or leave it. I also agree that It Follows and The Autopsy of Jane Doe were pretty scary. I don't know if they make the top 20, but I feel like they at least should be there. And the one that I feel I'm most surprised did not make this list is The Babadook. The Babadook comes in at number 16 on the list, which just upsets me so much because I thought The Babadook is Like, as a cohesive piece of art, it's beautiful. I love the messaging, but it is fucking scary. And I know we've touched on it a little bit earlier, so I don't need to go on my soapbox. What about you, Matt?
I agree with you on the Babadook. That movie actually kept me up at night after I watched it, and I was like in high school, so that was impressive. I have a list though, and I'll so foreign language. I said Pulse. If I don't know if anyone's seen that, but has probably one of the scariest scenes I've ever seen in it. The first 15 minutes of No One Will Save You, and only the first 15 minutes of No One Will Save You, which was an alien movie that came out a couple of years back. I had to put the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre on there. That movie makes me feel icky. I feel like I remember Evil Dead 2013, like the sort of remake, being pretty messed up. And my hot take and my last one, this is cheating, but I have never, ever been able to make it through an entire watch of the playthrough of the Hideo Kojima game PT. Not sure if that anyone else is familiar.
Iconic.
Yeah, good. Great. I have never, ever been able to make it through watching the whole thing. I couldn't play it. As we know, people can look up the whole story about PT, but basically the game never came out. It was just a playable teaser, hence the name PT. But it's horrific. Maybe this Halloween I'll actually make it through all 45 minutes of the playthrough. But as of now, I start sweating and my chest gets tight, and I say, you know what, I'm okay, and I turn it off.
You're wildin', bro.
I straight up sweat like when I start. So, Lonely, back me up. You're calling it iconic.
Oh, I love it. PT was supposed to be the second generation of Silent Hill, which, if anybody has heard me go on my Silent Hill rant, like, this is just totally my wheelhouse. And PT, it just elevated the story of Silent Hill to, like, if it's almost impossible to think that Silent Hill could get darker, but it kind of pulls it out of the 90s, 2000s camp and, like, brought it to this really, dare I say, like, dark, post 9/11 mental health kind of space. PT's fucked up. That's a movie that I would love to see. Don't know if I'd survive it, but great content.
You have it. You just can watch the playthrough. That's your movie.
I know, it is 45 minutes, basically a whole movie.
Yeah.
Who do you think? Who would you get to direct it? Who would you want to direct that one?
Hideo Kojima.
I mean, for me, I have no idea. I would need somebody entirely new. Actually, maybe the Skinamarink guy. If I wanted to see, my default for the answers like this are always Del Toro, but he goes fantasy so hard. Like, I don't think he could deliver the scare of PT.
Wasn't Del Toro involved with PT?
That's what I thought.
He was. He would have done stunning monsters on it. But, like, imagine if Del Toro did the original Silent Hill. Oh my god. Just the beauty. But he delivers so much heart in everything he does. Like, it would just take away the deep, dark ickiness that lies in that franchise.
And to be honest, maybe at this point, the best thing for us is that it is just this, like, myth. This game that never got to release. That makes it even scarier.
It's scarier that way, yeah. Editing, Hannah and Matt here, to give you the results of our Instagram poll about what our followers think are the scariest movies before we wrap up with Lonely and Suzie. So, as we mentioned earlier, we polled our Instagram followers and we included 4 movies from the top 5 scariest movies of all time according to science, including The Conjuring, Insidious, Skinamarink, and Host. Instagram only lets you put 4 in a poll, so we omitted Sinister, and that'll go up against the winners of the 2 previous polls. 7% that voted in the poll said Host was the scariest. 14% said Skinamarink. 36% said The Conjuring, which leaves Insidious with 43% of the vote.
Bad poll. I think not enough people have seen Skinamarink.
Yeah, but if you couldn't tell, the other ladies on this podcast
Also,
all agree that Insidious takes the cake of those, so hate to break it to you, Busted.
we need a better sample size, so everyone share with your friends, get them to follow us, get them to listen, so our sample size and our polls go up so we can be better with our statistics. Thank you.
True. So, we put Hereditary, which is the winner of our first poll, Insidious, and Sinister up against each other, asking which of the following horror movies is scariest. Sinister came in last, with 15% of the vote. Am I surprised? No. Are you surprised?
No, not really.
Insidious came in second with 31% of the vote. And good old Hereditary, Scary as Fuck, came in number 1 with 54% of the vote.
Love that for Hereditary.
Homies love Hereditary. It's true.
It's really good. It's one that I think a lot of people saw, too, when it's more on the art house side of things. It's kind of awesome that a lot of people did see it.
Mm-hmm.
So, good for Hereditary, good for Ari Aster.
Woot woot.
All right, well, this is editing. Matt and Hannah signing off to send you back to the normal broadcast.
Bye.
So, bye.
Well, I think we can wrap things up now. This was super fun to have you guys on here. I've been wanting to do this episode for a while, so it's great to have some very fun and intelligent guests on to join us. So, Suzie or Lonely, remind us where we can find No Bodies, and what your social media is.
Lonely, you can take that
You want me to do
one
it, Suzie?
so I don't mess up
Okay.
you.
Okay. You can find our main page at Nobody's Horror Podcast on Instagram. We're also active on Facebook. We are on all major podcast streaming platforms. Our favorite to share is Spotify. Suzie and I are also independent reviewers, so you can find me at Lonely Horror Club, and you can find Suzie at projectile__varmint, both on Filmstagram. So those are all the places that you can find us. So we can occasionally be found in intergalactic space dimensions, the back rooms, the woods at night, we're a stone's throw away at any time.
Well, thank you guys again for joining us. Go listen to them, everyone listening. Hannah, you got anything else?
No,
It's time
dog.
to get out of here. All right, I've been Matt Hannah,
As always, I'm Hannah.
and this is Horror Hour with the Hannahs. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Peace out, homies.
Thank you for listening to Horror Hour with the Hannahs. Make sure to listen to future episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, or wherever you can find podcasts. You can follow us at Horror Hour with the Hannahs on TikTok and Instagram for more content. If you like the podcast, please follow and leave a review on your favorite podcasting app. Happy hauntings!